Good. Right. Good morning to you all. Thank you for coming along this morning. My name is Kevin Parker. I'm going to talk to you today about innovation skills for chemists. Okay? And what I'm going to do to start with is to take you back just over 100 years. Here is a city that we know well. This is Edinburgh in 1900. And you can see that things have changed a little bit since then. For one thing, they have a tram system that worked in 1900. But let's have a think about the years between 1900 and 2012. What have been the things that have actually changed people's lives? What have been the technologies that changed people's lives in the last 100 years? Because it's my contention that chemistry is absolutely the central discipline. I trained as a chemist, I have a degree in chemistry, I have a PhD in chemistry, and in my view, chemistry was the discipline that did most to change the world in the 20th century. And I think it's going to be the discipline that changes the world for the good in the 21st century. So what kind of things, what technologies, what innovations did we not have in 1900 that we do have now? Can anyone think of any? Yeah.
Antibiotics.
Antibiotics, excellent. Why?
Because, why have they changed people's lives?
Yeah.
Because they're like one of the most other lead drugs to cure bacterial infection.
Yeah. Before about, what, 1950? Thousands or millions of people died of bacterial infections every year. It was quite common for someone to fall over and get a cut and get an infection and die from it sometime later. One of the old firm goalkeepers got bashed in a game of football, and 3 months later he died of a bacterial infection. Tuberculosis, rather romantically called consumption in the 19th and 20th century. Who died of tuberculosis? All the Brontes, George Orwell, most of the Romantic poets. All of that could have been avoided if only antibiotics had been invented sooner. So antibiotics, in fact, arguably the biggest change in people's lives in the last 100 years. You get an ear infection, it hurts, but you're not going to die from it. You can go to the doctor and get a pill. You can get a chest infection, and you can cough a bit, but you're not going to die from it. So antibiotics, an enormous change of the chemical industry, right? Introduced by the chemical industry. An enormous change in people's lives. Good. What else? What else has changed?
Cars.
Sorry?
Cars.
Speak up.
Cars.
Cars. Excellent. Yeah, because we have horses there. So how do cars work? They work on fuel, right? What is a car engine? Right? Because we get confused. Those of us who are car enthusiasts, we like to talk about overhead camshafts, 4 valves per cylinder and all that kind of thing. But what essentially is a car engine? What do you do inside a car engine? You combust, which is what kind of reaction? Combustion? It's chemistry, isn't it? Yeah? Combustion is a chemical reactor. A car engine is just a chemical reactor. It's a complicated chemical reactor made of bits of metal that moves. But effectively, a car engine is doing chemistry. A lot of the improvements in efficiency about how you react, how you mix the reaction products together. Right? It's chemistry. The development of fuel, the development of high octane fuels, that's all chemistry. And if, again, we think of the social impact that having personal, private transport and freedom. 100 years ago, people were worried about the influence of the bicycle on sexual morality, because people would be able to go from one village to another, uncontrolled, right? Now we can drive around. That, the advent of the motor car, has been an enormous change. And you could mention the diesel engine, and you could mention trains, and you could mention ships. Does anyone know how most modern ships are driven? They don't use coal anymore. Does anyone know what's in a modern ship? It's a giant diesel engine. It's an absolutely giant diesel engine. It is literally the size of a 2 or 3 story house. The cylinders are big enough to climb inside. And one of the things that those ships do in their ports is they open up the engines and people climb inside the cylinders to clean them out. What does globalization and the global economy depend on? It depends on cheap shipping. If we have globalization and we buy electric guitars from China and transistor amplifiers from Japan and Malaysia, what underpins all of that? It's cheap shipping. It's the diesel engine in a ship. It's partly cheap because the fuel it burns is absolutely horrible and rubbish. And I could tell you a lot of stories about the work that I used to do working for BP as a lubricants chemist trying to make that stuff work. Okay, so we've got antibiotics, we've got the internal combustion engine, petrol, fuel, all that kind of thing. What else? What's the other big change? Say the second half of the 20th century. It's been a big change. Perhaps the last 10 or 15 years there's been a big change.
Computers.
Computers, yes. And what underpins the computer? What was the invention that underpinned the computer? What's inside a computer? There's a chip, isn't there? And what's on the chip? What's the chip made from?
Transistors.
Transistors, yes. Okay. So one of the key inventions of the 20th century was inventing the transistor, which was a piece of silicon or germanium, which conducted electricity. Who is the transistor invented by? It was invented by a man called William Shockley, who worked for Bell Laboratories. He was a physicist, but there were chemists on the team. Arguably, the invention of the transistor was all about chemistry. Okay, anything else? If I started to look at my, my clothes, some of the things that you're wearing today.
Artificial fibers.
Artificial fibers, that was what you were going to say as well, was it?
Artificial dyes.
Artificial dyes. Artificial dyes, yes, although some of them actually were even earlier, the 19th century, but colours, artificial dyes. Artificial fibers. Lycron, rayon, Kevlar, all those kind of things. Did you know Kevlar? Kevlar was invented by a lady chemist. And you have thanks to her for your bulletproof underwear. So dyes, fibers, right? All those things, it's all chemistry. Without chemistry, we wouldn't have antibiotics. Without chemistry, we wouldn't have the transistor. Without chemistry, we wouldn't have fuel. What do most of our power stations depend on?
Gas.
Yeah, gas, coal, nuclear power. Right? These are all chemistry problems. And on the top left-hand side, you can see a wonderful slide that combines both the fast car and artificial fibers. So in other words, chemistry was the key science. It's the central science of the 20th century. Why is it going to be the key science of the 21st century? What are some of the things, what are some of the issues facing the world at the moment? What would you say are some of the main problems in the world at the moment? Global warming, yeah. And what's global warming all about?
Carbon dioxide.
It's about carbon dioxide and methane, right? 30 years ago, gosh, 30 years ago, in the 1970s and 1980s, there was a bright young chemistry lecturer here called Robert Donovan, and he's still on the staff. And Bob, as we called him because he was quite young in those days, was doing this slightly abstract science where he was reacting one molecule with another molecule to see what happened. And most of us students thought, well, that's quite clever, but what's that, why is that at all relevant and at all interesting? Have any of you looked at the chemistry, the way that methane is destroyed in the upper atmosphere? Now, that kind of work is really, really important now. One of the things that we do know about global warming is that carbon dioxide has an important role. One of the other things we do know is that methane has an important role. One of the areas where, as I understand it, there's still quite a lot of uncertainty is if you let a lot of methane into the atmosphere, supposing all of the tundra melts in Russia, supposing we have methane from gas hydrates, what will that do to the climate? How fast will that actually go away? So global warming and energy, I think the two are absolutely interlinked, and that's chemistry. What else?
Antibiotic resistance.
Antibiotic resistance. We've been very good at making antibiotics, and now we're sort of more or less proving the theory of evolution as applied to bacteria. The bacteria are evolving more quickly than we can bring out new antibiotics. Actually, one of the things that really worries me about global warming is there has been a tendency, as climates get warmer, for diseases that were tropical diseases to spread to temperate countries, where there may or may not be resistance. I think the big sort of scary downside of global warming will be some kind of disease spread. Okay, that's good. What else? What about this picture here? Water. Why is water important?
There is little water in the world.
Sorry?
There's only there is not enough water.
There's not enough water in the world, okay? And there are parts of the world, economically very important parts of the world, where there is not enough water. A lot of the conflict in the Middle East, especially in Palestine, is basically about who gets the water. A lot of the technical problem is there is a lot of water in the world, but most of it is salt water and contaminated. If you like, one of the main problems of the world is it's expensive to boil water. Right? Water has such a high heat capacity, such a high heat of vaporization, it's difficult to boil water. We could we could summarize a lot of the world's problems in that simple statement. How could we make more clean water? And that's a really big one. Yeah. Anything else?
Alternative energy sources.
Yeah, what sort of things do you have in mind?
Improved batteries.
Yep.
Solar
Batteries, yep. Batteries, that's chemistry. Solar power, that's chemistry. And look, there was in my first of my list. Rare earth magnets. You heard of samarium magnets in all your headphones? Right? There's something else where they're important. Photovoltaics, carbon capture, power transmission. Building better cables. Right? We go to quite a lot of time and trouble to make electricity power stations, and then we send the electricity around the country on big cables. How much of the electricity is wasted? It's about 10%, at least. About 10% of all the electricity we generate goes to warming cables. The birds like it, it's why they sit on the cables. There's a thing called the skin effect, which is a chemical physical effect, which means as the wires get thicker and thicker, you don't get the proportional increase in power transmission. All of the current tends to go on the edge of the metal, not through the core. Building insulation, really simple one. Where does most of Britain's carbon footprint come from? Is it air travel? No. Is it actually cars? No. It's actually from heating and cooling and ventilating buildings. 40% of all of our energy and therefore carbon footprint comes from buildings. So just simple things like better insulation. Right, that's chemistry. Anyone know what this is? This big chemical plant thing in this picture. That's an ammonia plant. Right? And one of the big inventions of the 20th century that we didn't talk about was the ability to make ammonia and nitrogen fertilizers, which therefore led to a huge increase in agricultural productivity. Why is that still an issue for the 21st century? Because we still need more ammonia. It's still an issue because actually this is pretty offensive to us chemists. We should hang our heads in shame, right? Because we think we're good at chemistry. We can react nitrogen with hydrogen in a plant like that at 500 degrees, at about 300 atmospheres. The wall thickness of the reactor is about that much steel. It's £1 billion to even think about a new nitrogen plant. Why should we be ashamed? Because peas and beans do the same reaction at room temperature in your back garden, right? And there's a whole range of other things that are out there. There's lots of natural gas in the world and it's not usable because it's difficult to transport. The major clothing fabric is cotton. Have a look at the environmental impact and the pesticides used in cotton growing. All these things, I submit, are chemistry. These are all opportunities for people like you to use your chemistry to change the world, okay? So, let's go back to commercial ideas. Typically, I spend quite a lot of my time doing odd bits of consultancy work, universities, companies, people like that. What's the kind of project I sometimes get asked, or very often get asked to do? Someone comes to me and says, Kevin, we've invented this. Do you think anyone wants it? People last year said, we've got a way of detecting DNA in animal droppings. Do you think anyone wants that, and why? Right? This is my life. It's very interesting if you like. And because I don't actually know very much about DNA or information technology or any of these other sciences, I can't answer that question just by using the science. I have to use something else. So what I'm going to show you is the kind of technique that I use for analysing the I've invented this, is it of interest to anyone? And I'm going to take you to the late 1990s, to an industry I do know well, which is the fuel industry. This isn't BP, this is Esso. And Esso have invented the very first fuel pump that works with a credit card. So you could stick your credit card into the fuel pump and just get your petrol. Now this is 10 years ago, so there's no chip and pin. In fact, actually most American credit cards still don't have chip and pin. So they've had to do quite a lot of clever things with magnetic strip recognition, reading the strip. They've had to develop new software. They've had to develop various sort of algorithms, various way of linking the credit card and the fuel pump back to the bank. And then of course they've got to build quite a lot of safety mechanisms in there. You've got electric devices sitting on top of something which is dispensing very large quantities of extremely inflammable liquid. And you go into a gas station these days and they say, turn off your mobile phone, as if that'll make a lot of difference. And then here they are putting a credit card reader actually in the fuel pump. So my question to you is this: having done all that hard technical work in order to make that invention, they then had a marketing campaign. They had TV advertisements. My question is this: what did they actually put in their TV ads? What things did they talk about in their TV ads?
Something that will emotionally affect the people that will watch it.
The what, sorry?
Emotionally affect them.
The emotional effect. What do you mean by the emotional effect?
Something that will make people, like, I don't know, affect them inside their soul. I don't know, something.
Yeah. Okay, you're kind of getting there. Anyone else?
So it's the time saving aspect.
Time saving. Yeah, okay. Good. Time saving, that's a possibility. Anything else? Okay. Let's have a look. And let's hope this works. Let's see if we can play this ad. There's little comments along the bottom that you should be able to read, but I'll read them out for you anyway. Why aren't we home yet? We'll be late for my favourite show. I love that purple dinosaur. I'm going to marry him. If I miss his show, Dad will be sorry. Isn't she adorable? Okay, so time saving, right? What have they advertised? What have they said? You are both right? Because they've linked the time saving with what? With your emotional, yeah. They pick out a particular example of when a dad would absolutely not want to be late. So they're trying to pick up a particular situation where it's really, really valuable to save time. Did they talk about the software? Did they talk about the algorithms? The magnetic strip record? Any of the clever work? No, they didn't. What they're talking about is what the technology does, not how it works. And the advertising industry has this interesting and useful distinction. It distinguishes the what and how a product is made, which they call its features, from what it does for the customers, its benefits. So you can take a statement that says something like this: my PC has a 2 gigahertz chip, that's a feature. What's the benefit? Oh, I can run the latest computer game on that. Death Star 3, Street Fighting Killer Man 4. Hey, and I can do it at the same time as having Word and Excel open in another window, so my boss doesn't know I'm playing Death Star 3. I once worked for a computer games company. It was hilarious because they were all sitting there playing computer games. It was impossible to tell who was working and who was just goofing off. My car has 7 seats. That's a feature. My car does have 7 seats. What's the benefit? Well, I have 3 children. I can take the kids and all their friends and all their stuff and get it in the car. And because my car has 3 rows of seats, I can put one child in the back, one in the middle, one in the front, and they don't fight. That's the benefit. It's probably not a benefit to many of you because I don't think that many of you have 3 children. My consultant has degrees from Harvard and Cambridge. You all see this in advertising material, don't you? Is that a benefit? No, it's not. It's a feature. What's the benefit? Well, perhaps he can treat my cancer. My skincare product has active protein biomolecules. What's the benefit? Well, people think I'm still attractive, despite the grey hair. Right? In other words, the message of the advertising industry is you advertise, you identify the benefits, not the features, and you advertise the benefits, not the features. Yeah. And that's important. So I've got 4 case studies just to briefly walk through. I'm going to talk about the invention of the transistor. I'm going to talk about a cutting fluid, positron tomography, and I'm going to talk about the 1960s. And we're going to look for the benefits, because there are 4 generic benefits that you can look for. And this is a useful thing to understand. We talked a little bit about the transistor. Invented by Bell Laboratories in 1950, what they wanted to do was make telephone systems work faster. In the old black and white movies, you'll sometimes see telephone operators switching people manually through. The transistor was designed by Bell Labs to do automated switching. That is the prototype on the left. It's a great hunk of, I think, germanium crystal. And it evolved to that. That's an individual transistor. And now we can put thousands, if not millions of transistors on one individual piece of silicon. We call that silicon chip. That's in our computers. Bell Labs invented this thing. Does anyone know what it replaced? Are there any electric guitar players in the audience? Are there any hi-fi enthusiasts? No. So the transistor replaced a thing called the thermionic valve. That thing on the left, it looks like a light bulb with more bits inside it. A triode valve or a pentode valve. Up until about 1950, that's what radios had inside them. I mention electric guitarists because the major application for valve amplifiers these days is still in electric guitar amps. Electric guitarists like the way that valve amps distort when they turn the volume up to 10 or 11. The thermionic valve is a big thing like a light bulb. It's on a metal frame, and in particular, it draws a lot of current. You've got to make all this as hot as a light bulb before it starts to work. So what you have is a radio like this with one of these, a mains lead. And I remember going to my granny's house in the early 1960s, and she had a big radio like that with valves in. It was the centerpiece of the family. And you'd switch this thing on, there'd be a big boom through the speakers. And after a minute or 2 minutes, it would start to glow. These things glow white or red or white hot. And you get heat coming off it. And then you could listen to one of, there were probably only about 3 radio stations. So one company took the transistor and built a radio with transistors in it. There it is. One of the first, and it had great sound. And it was about this big. And it was kind of portable because it's got a handle, but actually most of the time it still had one of these. It still had a mains lead. And yeah, they sold a few thousand of them. But there was another man in Japan who said, hey, this transistor's quite interesting. Because one of the things about the transistor is it doesn't need lots of electric current. One of the things about the transistor is I could build something that just requires batteries. And that was his first product. It was called Akio Morita. He called his company Sony because he didn't want it to sound too Japanese. This being only about 10 or 11 years after Pearl Harbor. But by the end of the 1950s, he's selling hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of these things. So what's the first benefit? What's he done?
Made it smaller.
He's made it smaller, yep.
Made it portable.
He's made it portable, and why is portability a benefit?
So you can take it with you like in the car or
Yeah.
go
Before this, we didn't have portable music. It's almost inconceivable to think of now, but you did not have portable music. If you wanted to listen to music outdoors, well, you probably took your musical instrument outside. Most parks in Britain have bandstands where you could go and listen to concerts of people playing usually trumpets and trombones to make enough noise. In Scotland, we invented the bagpipe, just so we could have something that makes a lot of noise outdoors. So portability is one big benefit. There's another benefit as well. What do all teenagers take for granted these days? One of the things about this was it was cheap. This was a big expensive thing. You had one per family. It was the family radio. Here, you could have, well, your teenage daughter could have her own transistor radio. Your son could have their own transistor radio. In other words, it's the transistor radio that stops teenagers from having to listen to their parents' music. Right? Before 1955, you had to listen to your parents' music all the time. How bad was that? Is it a coincidence that we suddenly get the explosion in rock and roll and teenage music just as this is invented? So, benefit number one. The invention was the transistor. The innovation was making a small, portable music player. Benefit number one is being able to do something really new and exciting for people. We couldn't do that before. Wow, this lets us do that. This lets us have musical choice. This lets us have portability. And Sony, repeated that trick several times. The portable cassette player, the portable CD player, and of course they were tricked or stumped by Apple inventing the iPod. But that, portability, innovation there is from something new for the users, something new for the customers. Okay? All right, number two, a cutting fluid. A cutting fluid is an example of chemistry. A cutting fluid is that stuff there that's spraying onto a piece of metal while we cut it. The machine tool industry, whenever we make things out of metal, we have things called lathes, we have milling machines, we have cutting machines, we have drilling machines, and almost always there is a chemical substance, a chemical fluid called a cutting fluid, sprayed at the material. You'll often see pictures of this You know, when on the news the government will say something like industry figures show industry is slowing down, and they'll show something like this process, and they'll show the lathes turning less quickly. Okay, so following statements. Our machine tool cutting fluid uses caprylic acid as an anti-wear additive. Is that a feature or is that a benefit? That's a feature. Good. Our cutting fluid helps machine steel to a surface roughness controlled to within 10 microns of tolerance. So if you looked at the surface of the metal under a microscope, it would have a little bit of irregularity, but it would be less than 10 microns. Is that a feature or a benefit? That's still a feature, okay? If I do this to engineers and metallurgists, they're already jumping up and down at this point, but it's still a feature. Our cutting fluid lets a major prestige car manufacturer finish the cylinder bores on its engines without the need for an expensive extra honing stage. Is that a benefit yet? That's a benefit, yeah? Our cutting fluid saves one extra stage of rework at the cylinder boring centre at the Jaguar engine plant. This could save Jaguar $2.5 million a year. It achieves this because its use of caprylic acid as an anti-wear additive gives very good surface finishes on machined tools, on machined steel surfaces. Benefit number 2 is something which saves the customer money. And in particular, saves ongoing costs. Jaguar will save that money every year into the future. They spend a little bit of money now buying our stuff, but they have ongoing savings. Right. Benefit number 2 is saving money. Incidentally, what I've just given you here is pretty much an elevator pitch. Our cutting fluid saves an extra stage of rework at the cylinder boring centre at Jaguar. Oh, that's good. You can save money for Jaguar. I've heard of them. How much? $2.5 million? Wow, that's good. How do you do that? Well, because we use this clever stuff called caprylic acid. Right? That effectively is an elevator pitch. All I'm asking you to do is produce 5 of those, you know. Okay, next one. Anyone heard of positron tomography? Yes, okay, and you'll know that it uses radiochemicals. We can give someone radiochemicals, we can analyze the beta particles coming out, we can build up a picture. It's like MRI, except it's pictures, images of living and metabolizing organs. One of the applications is it has the potential to replace diagnostic surgery. In particular, patients who get breast cancer. The primary tumours from breast cancer are fairly easy to detect, basically by inspection. The secondary tumours, if the cancer spreads, tend to go into the lymph nodes under the shoulder. What tends to happen now is, in order to check to see whether the cancer has spread, there's an operation, right? Invasive surgery. And that's much worse than anything they do to the primary, because it's cutting through these big shoulder muscles here. That is a much more invasive, much more intrusive, much more expensive process. And about half the time they do that surgery, they discover that the patient was clear. So the good news is you don't have cancer in the shoulder. The bad news is we cut your arm open. The bad news is that you're in hospital. The bad news is that costs £5,000 for each operation. The bad news is there's a chance of you getting infections because of antibiotic resistance. If we could replace that operation with a diagnostic technique, a non-invasive one, that would be a benefit, wouldn't it? Right. So benefit number 3 is, can we make people's lives easier? We have a difficult, painful, expensive process. Can we make that process safer, less painful and easier. Right? So generically, can we make people's lives easier? Okay. All right. Fourth benefit. Fourth benefit is a bit more subtle, because sometimes people say to me, all this stuff, it's fine for industrial products, industrial marketing. What about consumer products? You know, we don't buy consumer products just because they save us money. Yeah? We buy consumer products because they look nice and shiny. I was talking last year to a lecturer in fashion design. And she was talking to me about the 1960s, which is an era I do recollect. In the 1960s, we had arguably two great innovations. We had a lot of music, but we also had the mini car, and we had the mini skirt. And last week, did anyone hear Radio 4 last week? They were interviewing Mary Quant, who was the inventor of the mini skirt. The mini skirt, what she said was absolutely crucial in the invention of the mini skirt was the fabrics, was the polymers, was the polyesters. Right? It wasn't so much the skirt itself, it was that no one would wear a mini skirt without wearing tights. And what Mary Quant had to do was to go round lots of stocking manufacturers and persuade them to make tights so she could sell her mini skirts. And to make tights, well, you had to use artificial fibres. Right? So the polymer industry underpinned the invention of the miniskirt. The chemical industry also underpinned the invention of the mini car. The mini car was small and compact. It had the engine turned round at 90 degrees. In order to save space, it had the gearbox actually inside the engine. In order for that to work, they had to develop a whole series of new oils and lubricants. Right? So we have two inventions here, the mini car, the mini skirt, underpinned by technology, but that wasn't why people bought them. Again, talking to this fashion lecturer, she said, actually, people bought minis because they felt good about driving in a mini. People wore miniskirts because it made themselves feel good about themselves. It made them feel fashionable. It wasn't to get young men looking at their legs, although that was apparently a good side effect. It was what it did for the way you felt about yourself. We buy things that make us feel better about ourselves. And that's really interesting, because I was then reading about some people at the absolute opposite end of the commercial academic spectrum. And I was reading quotes about Charles Darwin. More than any other scientist, Charles Darwin changed the way that we view the world. The contributions made by Rosalind Franklin, which enabled us to uncover the structure and behavior of DNA, mean that we've come to understand more about ourselves, where we've been and what tomorrow will bring. The most enduring change brought by Einstein's work was to shake our sense of certainty. These are possibly the three big advances in science that everyone knows about. Right? They don't really know very much about Einstein or Darwin or DNA, but they've heard of it, and what it has done in each case is to change the way we think about the world, change the way we think about ourselves. If any of you are doing research projects and want to think of impact, there's part of your answer. Will my research project change the way that we think about ourselves in relation to the world? So we have benefit number 4, the intangible benefit. We're interested in things which make us feel better about ourselves, fashionable items, or make us change the way we think about ourselves. And that benefit encompasses everything from scientific theories, actually to works of art as well, but to commercial goods. So, what can we say about benefits? Benefits can result from features. Right? Features are not benefits in themselves. It is not a benefit that my computer has a terabyte of memory. It's not a benefit that my car has a 16-valve engine. It's what it lets me do. And it's very easy to see this looking at other people's technology. It sometimes is more difficult looking at your own. A feature may benefit one user, but not another, right? Not everyone needs a 7-seater car. One of the interesting questions is, how good do we have to be in order to deliver a benefit to a customer? So for the radio, how portable is portable? Has it got to be that big or that big? If it's portable with 2 hands, does that work? Has it got to be something we put in a pocket? So there is usually some kind of technical target that we have to reach, not for its own sake, but to actually deliver the benefit. I can go back to the example about cutting fluid, and I can say that if Jaguar cut out one stage of work, they will save $2.5 million. They either save $2.5 million or nothing. They either cut out that stage of work or they don't. You can see along the bottom that, perhaps 10 microns is the target. It might be that we start at 100 and get to 12, but it's not good enough. We've done a lot of technical and scientific work, but not quite enough to get the benefit. It might be, though, that we actually were at 12 anyway and just had to get to 9. One of the things that's important to know is how good do we have to be to get the benefit? Where are we starting from? Are we here? Or are we here? And in lots of cases, I find research projects that are actually already here saying, oh no, we must improve before we let it get on the market. And sometimes I'm saying, actually, no, you don't need to do that. So, features and benefits are not the same. A feature may benefit one user, but not another. We need to identify how good our feature needs to be. And there are 4 types of benefit. Benefit 1 is doing new things, like the transistor radio and portable music. Benefit 2 is saving money, like the cutting fluid. Benefit 3 is making life easier, like the positron tomography. Benefit 4 is changing our ideas about ourselves, like the miniskirts and the mini car. And your challenge for the rest of today and part of tomorrow is to look at the 5 projects that we've given you and apply this reasoning. What are the potential benefits that could come from those technologies? Yeah. So my last slide is this. How do you innovate? Companies want to recruit people that can innovate. And the first thing you have to understand is that technology is not commercially interesting in itself, it's what you can do for people. You need to use your unique technology to do something interesting for the people that are going to use it, the people that are going to pay for it. And you need to be able to spot when your technology is in a position to do that. You need to communicate that opportunity to other people who will not necessarily be chemists. And what kind of things are interesting to customers, to politicians, to the general public? It's stuff like this. Yeah, it's those benefits. Hey, that's new, that's really exciting. Oh, that's great, that saves me a lot of money. That's so much easier to do it that way. Oh, that's really interesting. And one of the things you want to remember is this for commercial success. Someone with money, someone with a problem is actually an opportunity for you. All those things that I talked about at the beginning of the lecture, water shortage, global warming, climate change, energy supplies, there are people there with money, there are people there with a problem. And whenever there is someone with a problem, that's an opportunity for us. I used to have a boss at BP who would go along walking through our offices saying, there's no such thing as problems. There's only opportunities, Kevin. And one evening I found him at 6 o'clock on a Friday, sitting in his desk, looking like this. I said, "What's the trouble, boss?" He said, "I've got an insoluble opportunity on my hands." Okay, so that's innovation. That's, I hope, being interesting. That, I hope, will start you off on your task for the rest of today and tomorrow morning. Thank you.